Hey, before we welcome in Evan Bland from the World-Herald, talk a little Nebraska regional baseball. So Dave, who lives in a beautiful part of the country, longtime listener, 1620 The Zone in North Carolina, huge Husker fan. He also works for UNC Athletics. He has given some tips for people that are worried about getting tickets because North Carolina fans love their baseball. Now, I don't know how many Oklahoma and Nebraska fans will travel or Holy Cross, but North Carolina usually packs that park, and it's a beautiful First of all, it's a beautiful part of the country. Chapel Hill, the Triangle is wonderful, and that stadium is really picturesque. He says, we have an awesome viewing area in right field. Think of a high school fence with no limitations with what you can do. Bring your own food and drink. Hint, hint, wink, wink. You can also watch from the field hockey stands for free like Wrigley Field bleacher bums. That is a tip from Dave, who lives in North Carolina and works for the Tar Heels.
I like that,
We will hold his last name for, fear of retribution by the Tar Heels if Nebraska is celebrating on their field on Sunday. Somebody who covered a celebration on the field on Sunday this past one was Evan Bland of the World-Herald. He joins us now. Good morning, Evan.
Hey, guys. Happy Monday or Thursday.
Yeah. Short week, but now baseball speeds up tomorrow. So we have ridden the Will roller coaster this entire season of the good, the bad, the ugly, the frustrating stuff, the exhilaration. And then they pull off 4 in a row in Omaha, and they have at least 2 games to go and maybe more. So is this season a success, or is it still an open question that this team repeated as a tournament champ and repeats in the NCAA tournament?
Well, I think it's almost a question of is it a success based on the results or the path that it took to get there? Because you think about where this team was in early February. They were a preseason top 25 team. They were picked by coaches in the Big Ten to finish second in the league. And ultimately, they kind of ended up where we thought they would end up. But the path that it took to get there was not at all what was expected in terms of the injuries that they suffered, in terms of the slow start or needing to win the Big Ten tournament to advance into the postseason. So it kind of feels to me like we're back at base level of what people thought this team could be going into this year. And now, in sort of an ironic twist, all the things that nearly sunk Nebraska baseball are the very things that you point to and say this is why they could make a run in a regional. It's the way that they figured out the pitching after the injuries. It's the way that they've gone 6-2 against ranked competition and beaten the number 1 overall seed in Vanderbilt and just beat 2 regional hosts in Omaha in an elimination setting last weekend. So it does feel like this team has been in elimination mode, playoff mode for a good month. And so it's not a situation now where you're like, boy, can they turn it on? Can they get going? I mean, what we just saw them do in Omaha was more impressive than what it takes to win a regional, quite honestly. You have no margin for error. You're facing 2 ranked teams. That's not the case at the Chapel Hill Regional this weekend. So it does feel like they've sort of bottled up what they need to do. They've gotten hot at the right time. They're on their longest winning streak of the year, just when you need to have it happen. And so, I mean, I think, ultimately the bottom line is it's been a successful season, and now there's a chance to exceed those expectations by trying to win a weekend, getting out of the first weekend for the first time in 20 years.
Evan, you released your preview of the Chapel Hill Regional about an hour ago. It was a very good read. And I think a lot of people celebrated when they found out that Kyson Witherspoon wasn't going to be pitching tomorrow. Instead, Malachi Witherspoon is going to be pitching, and he's got a 5.33 ERA. But you mentioned, or 5.53 ERA. You mentioned in your article, though, that he is projected to go in the first 3 rounds of the upcoming MLB draft. And so he still is a guy that has a lot of stuff and could give Nebraska some problems. But my question is, his ERA in the SEC is a 5.53. What does a 5.53 ERA in the SEC equate to in the Big Ten, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question because you do kind of have to, in your head, almost bump them up a little bit just because of the level of competition. It probably in the high 4s, maybe. It might be worth about a run differential. It's kind of funny because you look at like SEC offensive numbers, like where they stack up nationally, and they're very middle of the road. But that's not because the offenses are middle of the road. It's because the pitching in that league is just unbelievable. And so, I think his numbers in the Big Ten, he'd be a top quarter of the league kind of guy. I don't know that if he's better than Joseph Jurwa at Michigan State or Grayson Grenzel. He's got some raw ability. Like the thing that stood out from him was his last start against Texas. He didn't pitch in the SEC tournament, but his coach was saying, I mean, he was throwing upper 90s into the seventh inning against Texas, had double-digit strikeouts. His team lost the game, but he's got all kinds of tools, ability, and so there's going to be some velocity. The command kind of comes and goes. But yeah, I think if you're a Nebraska fan and you've seen the news that Oklahoma's not throwing their ace, I think there can be a tendency to just kind of think, wow, they're going to just kind of scrap this thing together. But that's not the case. I mean, Malachi Witherspoon was a 12th round draft pick out of high school. He, has been a Sunday starter all year. Like you mentioned, he's going to be probably a top 5 round draft pick this summer. So he's got ability. It just hasn't been to the level of his brother with just the ridiculous command and swing and miss stuff that he shows. So yeah, I mean, Nebraska's going to have their hands full with this thing. I still think the thing about the Nebraska offense that can give opposing pitchers trouble is it's not a standard sort of swing for the fences offense that you're going to see in the SEC in places. It's a one that's going to lay down bunts and at different times. It's one that wants to work walks and grind out plate appearances. And so I think sometimes that can give pitchers some trouble. We saw that in Omaha last week. We've seen that at times when they faced some pretty high arms, especially outside the league. So that's what I'm watching for is like, can you get into the bullpen early? He's got velocity, but the command isn't always there. Nebraska can make you pay for that sort of thing. So we'll see how it shakes out, but definitely it does feel like maybe there's a little bit more momentum, certainly a chip on the shoulder of those guys going out there knowing that Oklahoma's not going to throw their best guy in that regional opener.
All right, so let's reverse roles here, and let's play. We are on Oklahoma City Sports Talk Radio, and we're on the Sports Animal, and I won't try and impersonate him, but Al Eschbach is interviewing Evan Bland, and he says, how come Nebraska's not pitching their ace? I watched this Horn kid on Sunday dominate UCLA. They're throwing some guy named Jackson at us. I would pause and I would say, well, look at his numbers, but Jackson Brockett against Oklahoma, how do you feel about that? And also, how do you feel about the end of the season that he has had?
He's been really good. Yeah. Last 6 starts, sub-2 ERA. I was surprised, Gary. I was looking at the numbers going into the Big Ten tournament, and you would see, I was curious. I always like to look at conference-only stats at that point in the year because it's more apples-to-apples comparison. And you saw Jurwa near the top. You saw Grayson Grenzel near the top. And you know who else you saw right at the top was Jackson Brockett. Like, very quietly had an outstanding Big Ten conference season. And obviously that translated into the tournament. He was the one who beat Oregon. He's a guy who, we know what the top end of his potential is. He threw a no-hitter last year. He had that gem in the Big Ten championship game against Penn State last year. He's kind of been through everything, seen everything. And, the Ty Horn discussion to me ends after you see that he threw 118 pitches on Sunday. Mm-hmm. Like that's a guy that you bring back on Saturday, probably. Maybe Sunday if things set up a certain way. But I think Brockett has been your most reliable guy over that time. Maybe not, he hasn't had the highest of highs the way that Horn has, but I think Brockett's the guy that you put out there just because you have a pretty good sense of what he's going to give you. He's going to give you 5 at least quality innings. Oklahoma's a pretty balanced lineup, so I don't know that you look too heavily at the left-right splits as much, but at this time of year, you want a guy who can miss some bats. You want a guy who can limit free passes. Brockett's done all of that. Again, we just saw what he did against Oregon, so I feel pretty good about starting that. And then, to me, one of the themes of this regional, you look at the other 3 teams in this grouping, they all have really potent 1-2 punches. And I think where Nebraska differs is it has a little bit more depth in terms of its starting pitching. So like if you can get to a point where you're playing Sunday or potentially Monday, like I think Nebraska, that's advantage Nebraska if you get to that point. Now early on, you're going to have to hang with some of these high end frontline starters that everyone else is going to throw out there. And I think Brockett can hold his own on that. But the longer Nebraska stays in this thing, the more I think the pitching starts to turn out in their favor.
Like you said, this team's been playing like playoff baseball for the last month. How concerned are you that it might have been too much at this point? There's might have been too much pressure on these games that they've been playing, and they have a letdown.
I mean, it's always possible. Like you go through the week that you just had, and it almost takes like 2 days to decompress. I mean, it took me a day. I was there every day, and I didn't play. I was just up there watching. Like, and it felt it was like there was an intensity to it, and so you have to recalibrate and reset. And again, I think the thing that helps Nebraska in that regard is that it's played this kind of a schedule most of the year. Like it's faced SEC teams before. Obviously, it had to have what it had in Omaha, but it feels like they're just going to continue to do what they're doing. Like they've lost one weekend in the last like month and a half. I think they have a good sense now of how they want to go about things, what players' individual roles are. Maybe more specifically, I'll just be curious how some of the injuries affect the offense in particular. Like, are you going to get Joshua Overbeek back from his ankle? Is Robbie Bolin going to be 100% after the hammy that he tweaked last weekend? Ty Stone, is he back in the mix? We haven't seen him in a couple weeks after he took that pitch to the wrist. So that to me is just as interesting as maybe the momentum piece, because it just feels like the identity finally is a little bit established with this team. And if they take on the personality of their coach, which it's pretty clear that they have, like I just don't see them coming out flat. I think it would be more a result of the opponent and them doing something really impressive, or maybe some of the injuries catching up to them offensively.
Hey, what moment in the Oregon game Saturday morning did Overbeek get hurt?
It was, he said it was the 8th inning. He was on first, and there was a single up the middle, and he turned his ankle rounding second was when that happened. So Will Bolt said he was hobbling a little bit Monday. And the great thing about like the situation is Rhett Stokes came in, and Nebraska really didn't miss a beat. Like he was really solid there defensively. He's been a guy who's been a lineup regular. He was a conference player of the week last year a couple times. So it's not a deal breaker if he's not in there. I do think they have some depth, but Overbeek has that switch hitting ability, a little bit more power potential, which can come in handy, especially at a smaller park like North Carolina. So, we'll see how it shakes out, but I just think that's something to watch. That was a guy who was hitting in the 2-hole for a good portion of the stretch for Nebraska down the stretch.
You talked about how Oklahoma, that they're not necessarily the prototypical SEC team where they just have all these studs and they let guys swing away and launch balls into the outfield, that they grind out at bats and, they might lay down some bunts. That sounds like Big Ten baseball to me, Evan Bland. Is that a potential advantage for Nebraska, that they've fielded against those teams before? They've played against that type of style of play of offense?
Maybe. I think Oklahoma's style very much mirrors Nebraska's style, actually. Like there's a lot of the SEC teams are more of the kind of Major League Baseball, true outcomes style approach. Oklahoma, I mean, people who follow the College World Series remember that team in 22 that made the final, and it was playing kind of the way that it's playing now, in terms of like how we're talking about with Nebraska, hitting runs, stolen bases, bunts, long counts, pressuring defenses wherever you can. Like that's kind of their style. So I think that'll be fun. Like it'll be interesting. Sure. And then it comes down to like some of the smaller stuff. Like can you hold, who can hold runners on base better? And can Hogan Haligso, like he had a great Big Ten tournament defensively. Can that carry over? Like that's going to be one of those things that's kind of a smaller detail type thing that could end up being making a big difference in a game like that too. North Carolina is a little bit more traditional in terms of how it goes about things. If Nebraska ends up playing Holy Cross, like that's a team, I suppose, that's a little more of a small ball sort of situation too. So you're not going to see, I don't think a ton of home runs in this regional. I do think a lot of it's going to be base running and situational hitting and clutch moments, things like that. So yeah, I think it'll make for a lot of action. That's for sure.
It's a very intriguing regional, and Saturday or Friday at 4 should be a great matchup. Evan, as always, we appreciate your time. Enjoy the baseball this weekend, and we'll talk on Monday.
Thanks, guys.